All right, welcome to NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode is on the Las Vegas Raiders, and I am joined by Micah from the Raider Take podcast. How's it going?
Not bad. Happy to be on here. Glad to do this. Excited for it.
Absolutely. I like to say any day I can talk about football is a good day.
Absolutely. Right there with you.
It's been an interesting season, to say the least, with the Raiders, and, been a lot of expectations kind of up and down. Um, First of all, let's just go ahead and talk about kind of right away an upcoming matchup. Jack Del Rio coming versus his old team.
Yeah, definitely the storyline going into this one, especially because Del Rio was head coaching when the Raiders had their last, great season. Everybody refers back to, Derek Carr's 2016 season as, the elite year he's had, and Del Rio was at the helm of that, even though he is a defensive coach. But yeah, very interesting. It didn't end well for Del Rio in Oakland, and I think he still has a lot of resentment to this day. And honestly, I feel like if he hadn't of still kind of had that talking to the media and like making comments and stuff about the Raiders the last couple years, I don't know how much of a storyline this would have been, but because it's kind of hot and fiery still for the most part from the little bit that we see, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be exciting, and it's gonna be great to see how it kind of pans out.
It's interesting. Jack Del Rio is one of those coaches just has kind of hung around the game for so long. Obviously being a player and everything, and I almost forgot that he was coaching still until
Yeah.
you see him on the sideline, and now you know obviously a interesting matchup versus the Raiders now.
Yeah, definitely. And he was one of those people that, he did well when he was coaching for us, and he was so much of a player's coach. Everybody loved him, and it was one of those things that kind of was like, all right, there's good locker room, going on with him, and everybody likes playing for him and whatnot. And the 2017 season, after we had that great season, was kind of where you saw the negative side of that because it got to a point where he was kind of trying to please everybody and kind of lost the locker room for the most part from what was put out there through the media, from whatever it was they wanted us to hear. But that was kind of the narrative. So I'm not surprised you see him kind of, still getting jobs because he did do well, but he's also a very relatable guy, nice guy. People like to play for him. So.
Well, yeah, and speaking of one of his former teammates, Derek Carr, now he could be. I don't know if he's a lightning rod within the fan base or just kind of around the league or whatever. Talk about him and obviously his connection to Del Rio, and then even now into his present and future for the team.
Yeah, so Derek Carr is probably the most polarizing person that Raider Nation has currently and has seen really since he's kind of gotten here. And yeah, it's interesting because we on our podcast we very much like Derek Carr. We can also call it how it is in the moments when he's not doing well and when he is doing well. And he's one of those guys that he can be a top five quarterback when he's on, and he could be the reason we lose a game and can't stay in it if he's not doing well. So far this season, the Raiders are 6-0 when he's thrown for 300 yards or more, and they're 0-5 when he hasn't. So this year, especially, we're seeing the Raiders kind of living and dying by him. But when Del Rio was coaching, he had Olsen as his offensive coordinator, so it was very similar. Del Rio's a defensive guy, so how much influence he had on Carr was questionable. I'm not sure how much he was in there with the offense, but yeah, I don't know. It's just Derek Carr is definitely very polarizing. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of emotion for him and any of the players that are still there from that time frame. So it's going to be fun for sure.
Well, yeah, the talent's there definitely. You see it in spurts, and some games you definitely see him, coming through. But I don't know kind of what it is. It's just, and he actually, I don't know if that was a Monday night game. Was that the Ravens game that they won? There was a Monday night game they won, and I remember he in a post game interview he acknowledged the roller coaster of his career.
Yeah, definitely. And the Ravens game was week 1, Monday night. We won in overtime.
That's what it was.
And we've had 3 overtime wins, including this last one on Thanksgiving. So, yeah, he knows he knows how, he comes across to the organization, to the fans, the roller coaster he has had, and he acknowledges every little bit of it, and takes the heat where he deserves to take the heat, and well, he's a pretty humble guy, he's a pretty nice dude, but he definitely he knows where he's in his eighth season now, and he's pretty candid about his feelings on the stuff that he hears, and how he's kind of perceived, because it's one of those things where you're either on one extreme or the other. It's very much politics type of love and hate for him in regards, and the people saying that he is that quarterback and can lead us to a potential Super Bowl, and the people saying that we need to move on from him, they all have valid points, because we have seen the up and down, side of things. So it's very interesting dynamic, Derek Carr within the Raider Nation.
Well, absolutely. And just the way he handled the Henry Ruggs situation in the interview, saying he wondered if he could have done more. I mean, that's what you want to hear from a leader, from a quarterback, face of your franchise, whatnot. But then, I'm a Bears fan, and I had a chance to go to the 2019 training camp, the Bears, and Mitch Trubisky, one of the nicest guys, stayed long and was signing autographs and everything like that. Seemed like, a great guy, but it just didn't translate to the field. Now, Trubisky is not even on the level of Derek Carr. I mean, he can be a great guy, but just maybe not the answer at quarterback.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you always got to like separate the man from the player and everything like that, and as nice of a guy that he is someone that's going to be like, hey, I'm going to be there for you no matter what, whatever you need, let me know, I'm going to love you no matter what happens. And he was talking about how Ruggs just needs to be loved right now because he's a young kid that made a mistake. He was also on the side of like, we do have a game to play this week and we do have to move on. So towing that line of like, this is a business, but also being sentimental and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, you could be the nicest person in the world and not translate on the football field. And, you can't necessarily get hung up on like, well, he's the nicest person ever, so we shouldn't move on from him. It's like, it is a business in one
Mhm.
regards. Now, I don't necessarily know if it's time for them to move on from him. I won't say that. I think he has played very well, but yes, you are correct. You got to, look at the person, and you can't necessarily, combine the two and be like, well, he's a nice guy. So
Right.
if
Well,
it,
and how many more years does he have on his contract, and how much of a burden would it be to move on from him if they were to make that choice?
So I believe he is signed through 2023. So I think he has 2 more years on this last extension that they gave him. I think it's one of those things that if you're going to move on from him, there's a good chance that you're just accepting that you're going to be in a rebuild situation.
Mm,
And as much as, the Raiders are kind of in a limbo situation where they've been very good the last 3 years. Granted, that was with when Gruden was here. For the last 3 years, they've started out very hot and then they've just crumbled on the back end of things. So we finally have a defense that is able to keep us in games, which we haven't had for a long, really since the 2016 season. Um, so I think moving on from him, you would kind of have to essentially, my guess would be draft somebody that you wanted to, be that franchise guy down the road. But I think moving on from him is kind of accepting somewhat of a rebuild. I think it does put them back, a few years if they do decide to do that. But at some point you have to, decide whether you want to go that route and just pull the trigger on it. So I think best case scenario, if we drafted, we were able to get somebody that was a top tier talent at quarterback, you're looking at a few years before he might be able to be that guy, to potentially take you farther than where Carr has been. So it's a weird situation where
mhm.
it'll be hard to upgrade from him where we're at, but at the same time, you've got 8 years of tape on what he's done for us, and you got to ask yourself on whether he can get you there. So
Right, absolutely. And if there was kind of a rebuild, or even kind of looking forward, do you trust Mayock? I mean, how would you grade him in just kind of this roster and everything? And with the drafting, obviously, as a Bears fan, I know the Mac trade, and I think almost all those draft picks have not worked out, right?
yeah, I mean, more of them than not.
Mhm.
Have not worked out as far as the high end draft picks. I've been on the believing in Mayock train, because I feel like with the way the Raiders brought Gruden in and then went out and got Mayock to bring him in, I feel like Gruden had a lot more say over the important early round picks, first and second round picks, and then Mayock was kind of given full reins of everything after that. And if you look at all the drafts since Mayock has come in, where we've really hit is that third to fifth round draft picks. You've got Hunter Renfrow, you got Foster Moreau, you got Max Crosby, who's been one of the best DNs in the league. So my where I stand with that is I question how much of the final say he had on any of the first and second round picks. And I'm sure he had a lot of say, but my opinion is that Gruden really was the final say on things. And if Gruden wanted to go one way, I think he was going to get that final decision over Mayock. So I am in the boat of giving Mayock at least one off season and draft, having 100% complete control over it and seeing where he goes with that. Because I do believe that he is a great, analyzer of talent and is able to do that. And I think it shows on a lot of the back end draft picks we've had. So, if you're going to clean house, you kind of want to clean house all throughout it. But I think Mayock at least deserves a chance to see what he can do with 100% of the reins. Because usually you bring in a GM and then he'll go find the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
They brought in a head coach, essentially went and found someone who is willing to conform to what Gruden wanted to do and, be a yes man, in my opinion. So not taking anything away from him and how he's done his job. But as far as the drafts are concerned, I think he's due one full draft with 100% control.
Absolutely. And you talk about, Gruden, it's been a challenging year. He was a very strong personality, not necessarily kind of the best, it kind of evaluating talent, or maybe, it sounds like the cupboard is kind of been bare kind of from what you hear kind of nationally. Is that true? Or, what are the thoughts, was the fan base ready to move on from him, or is just kind of like good riddance, or what was the thought?
Well, like you said, he's very strong personality. I think Gruden knew what he wanted to do, was very set in his ways. I think that what he was doing, what he was building, was working, but at the same time could have been a little bit outdated for the newer NFL and whatnot. So kind of, I think people were fed up with his, I guess, lack of ability of really eyeing talent, but also he would get very conservative in the offense. But so I think him leaving, I think as much as like people really liked him as a hard-nosed coach, someone who'll tell you like it is and get on you, he kept a lot of structure within the team. I think there was some people in that organization, or at least players and stuff, that were like, whatever. Like I'm indifferent about it. Not necessarily happy he's gone, but not very upset about it. I think you look at Ruggs, and Ruggs was kind of like a little brother in that locker room. Gruden had this terrible situation with these emails that came out, very misogynistic and racist wording and stuff like that, and got caught up with the cancel culture essentially going on and whatnot. And but Ruggs, he ruined his life. You know what I mean? He absolutely ruined his life with such a terrible decision. And there's a lot of players on the Raiders that played with him at Alabama, so they've been a brother with him since college. And so I think Gruden leaving and all that happening, I think the team was able to kind of bounce back from that. I think the Ruggs thing was really hard because it was a completely different situation of losing a little brother in the locker room, and seeing someone so young essentially ruin his life. So I think we were seeing that the way Gruden was able to hold together a team as far as accountability and as far as structure and discipline. I think we're starting to see a little bit of it affect the team right now, as far as them kind of just there's not as strong of a game plan as there usually was with Gruden there, and there's not as much of kind of knowing where they're going, what they're trying to do on certain plays, certain drives. They're kind of just trying things, not working, go to the next thing. So Oh, it's kind of a lot I rambled on. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's all good stuff, and that kind of leads me then, like, do they kind of go the opposite then of Gruden? I mean, what are you hearing? Just maybe some targets, for coaches. I mean, is it Bisaccia, right? I mean, is he like a legitimate candidate, or just kind of for this year? Because I've heard he's well loved within the NFL.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I really haven't heard a whole lot as far as candidates because they're in a very tricky situation. Most teams that lose a coach mid-season, it says he gets fired because the team's doing very bad, and they're kind of already in like looking to the off season, looking at what's going on. The Raiders are very much in the hunt for winning the division, getting into the playoffs. So a lot of it's focused on the here and now, and not necessarily looking down the road already to where they might go coach wise. Uh, I think that I would be hard pressed to see Bisaccia get that final job. I think that people do love him. Mayock has pounded the table for him a few times to other teams and whatnot as a potential person as a head coach. So far, what we've seen up until this point, I think he's done well to be an interim. I'd be hard pressed to see them actually pull the trigger on giving him the full-time job. And it could be very different if, they kill it the rest of the season, go into the playoffs, make some noise, and you see how this team rallies behind him and whatnot. But I think the choice of putting Bisaccia as the head coach was more so to keep Gus Bradley focused on his defense, keep Olsen focused on his offense. Bisaccia was able to still somewhat coach the special teams, have his guys continue to coach the special teams with him, but also oversee. So I don't necessarily know if he was the choice because he was the best candidate on our on our roster coaches wise to be a head coach. But nonetheless, I think he's doing a good job. I don't know. It would be hard for me to say, yeah, he's got a legit shot at being the head coach going into next year outside of something happening this year where we just go on a tear. He figures things out and, gets the team where they need to be.
Now, would you like to see a more offensive-minded coach then? Or, um, you kind of trust, with Carr, just someone would come in and just kind of, help that offense just kind of be more explosive, or
Yeah, I would say that someone leaning more towards the offensive side of things, especially if it was someone younger that was very inept with like the newer style of the NFL, that can really kind of open things up and let it loose. I think a big reason for bringing an offensive guy in is because we've seen how good Gus Bradley has been just this year for us. You bring a defensive guy in, he's going to probably want to change the scheme, probably want to bring his own feel of things in there and how he runs things. And I think we got a good thing with Gus Bradley right now. So I think it would be hard to really throw a lot of that out. I think it's easier to bring in an offensive person that will change Gruden's, offense that we're essentially still running a lot of the stuff, that Gruden has implemented and, what is his offense to a certain extent. So, kind of replacing what is already gone and, having a, having somewhat of a, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but
yeah.
the offensive coach that instilled that scheme is gone. So that's going to change at some point and going to have to change to what's new. I wouldn't want to mess with the defense, which I
Right,
feel like
absolutely.
would happen. So
Yeah, that's a great point. And speaking of some of the talent on the offensive side, with running backs, Josh Jacobs, is he elite? He's got some injuries, and you've got some journeymen that have been kind of I don't know, filling in, with Kenyon Drake, and talk about that position group and where you see Josh Jacobs going, in the future. Like, is he going to be kind of the mainstay workhorse eventually if he can stay healthy, or
yeah, I do believe that he is an elite running back when he is healthy, and I think that he's shown that for us, and in that he, that our offense is completely different when he's on the field, and he's 100%. Now that being said, he's been plagued with injuries the last year and a half, and it's tough because your best ability is availability. So we
mm,
can sit here and say that he's an elite running back all day, but if he can't be on the field for us, like what good is that? You see the Giants in a similar situation with Saquon Barkley.
mhm.
He's probably could be the number one running back in the NFL, and might have been at one point when he's healthy. But when he's not out there, it's hard to say. And I think you're seeing a lot of the NFL kind of show that you can find talent in later rounds. You don't necessarily have to spend a first round draft pick on running backs. And as much as the elite running backs can be, first round guys and whatnot, you see someone like Zeke Elliott, whatnot. You also see people like Alvin Kamara, who was a third round draft pick, him being one of the top running backs in the league. So I feel like running backs can really be hit or miss. I do really like Josh Jacobs. I don't know if I see them picking up his 5th-year option at this point, and where they go from there on any contract extensions. Is it going to pan out a lot of how this season kind of ends out, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting. I do really like him. I think that he makes a difference on our offense, but his involvement, where we're at 2-3 years from now with him,
Right.
it's hard to say.
Yeah. So when would his 5th-year option be? Would that be the
5th-year option would be, I think next year. I think
okay?
him. Yeah, if I remember correctly, 2018.
So he
Man,
could
when was
potentially
that?
not be with the Raiders next year unless he was like through.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when he got drafted with Clelin Ferrell and
Oh yeah,
Jonathan Abram, when we had the Cowboys and one of the Bears as picks, all
oh
three
yeah,
of them in the first round. So I think that was 19. So I think next year he's got one more year, and then the year
yeah.
after that is his 5th-year option. So
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see if he can stay healthy. And talk about like another skill group, the wide receiver group. Hunter Renfrow. I mean, he just steady. He's that guy. Is he a number one wide receiver, or you brought in Deshaun Jackson, there's a Deshaun Jackson sighting on Thanksgiving, and
mhm.
Zay Jones. Talk about that group, and might that be a position that they need to focus on in the draft?
Yeah, well, I do. I think Hunter Renfrow thrives in not being a number one wide receiver.
Mhm.
I think that his biggest thing is being able to play in the slot and kind of move around. And he's so twitchy and he's so good with his route running. He's so precise with his route running that that's how he makes guys miss. He's not necessarily just going to blow right past you, but he's going to create space when he gets the chance to. And him being in the slot, or being closer to the line of scrimmage allows him to be able to do that. So I think that I don't think Hunter Renfrow is a number one wide receiver, but I don't think he's supposed to be either. I don't think that's a knock on him saying he's not a number one. I think he thrives in being that second option, that third option that's going to, be third and Renfrow for you. He's going to be reliable. He's going to, get open. He's going to hang on to the ball when it's thrown to him, and he'll sit there and take a hit. He's the definition of grit on our team, really, because he'll grind it out, with the best of them. And more often than not, this year he's been winning. So, yeah, I think receiver is definitely going to be something we want to focus on in the draft. I mean, we just spent a really high draft pick on someone who's not on the team anymore,
Mhm.
last year with for Ruggs. So it's obviously something that we've lost in and are going to have to work on. I'm glad Deshaun Jackson kind of got something going. He really loves playing against the Cowboys, apparently. Loves playing there in Dallas because he seems to always do well. But I think he's kind of coming into his own. We miss a big hole in our offense with a speedy guy that can take the top off the defense with Ruggs gone, and that takes away an element of your offense in regards to what teams have to defend against. So I think Deshaun brings that back. I think a lot of people thought Zay Jones was going to fill that role, and he's doing so a little bit. But I think teams just aren't afraid of them like they were Ruggs, and it might be
Mhm.
because they just haven't quite shown it yet, on that they can do that. Ruggs was from the get go kind of burning people and making big plays on the field, so they had to account for it. I think people are looking at Deshaun and Zay Jones and saying, "Beat us first, and then we'll worry about you."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, when you talk about like a strength of the team, I mean, you've got Darren Waller, who almost is essentially a number one wide receiver at tight end. He it looks like he's hurt this week, and we're finding the island of Dr. Foster Moreau. I had to throw that in there. And how talented is Foster Moreau coming in, and might they be the best tight end combo in the league?
Yeah, I think one of the most underrated players on our team is Foster Moreau, and a lot of people last year were clamoring for him to get more snaps. He was seeing, a lot of times sitting behind Jason Witten, old 50-year-old Jason Witten that
Right.
that Gruden brought in. But yeah, he's been. I think he's one of the more underrated players on our team because he, as much as he can go out there, run routes, body up on people, make catches, he's been one of our best edge blockers throughout the year. And we saw when Alec Ingold went down a few weeks back, tore his ACL. They ended up putting Moreau back there at fullback and bringing in our third tight end to block. And you just saw how much our blocking suffered from that because you essentially have two guys that are out of position. And with him off the edge, he sets the edge so well. He's able to pull and kick out so well in the blocking game. And then you put him out there running routes, and he can go out there and score touchdowns. He's a great red zone target. So he filled in for Waller once when Waller got hurt earlier in the year, and he did great. I think on top of having a great 1-2 combo in them, I think you have a fantastic number two to fill in when you see situations like this with Waller. Waller could be out multiple weeks. It could be just this week. It's hard to tell. I guess he injured his IT band in his knee, so luckily it
Mhm.
wasn't any type of torn ligaments. You watch the play happen, and you're like, "Crap, that's an ACL" or something along those lines. So it was nice to hear that it wasn't. But yeah, I think Darren Waller's obviously our number one target. I call him our number one wide receiver. That's basically what he is. It's hard to
Mhm.
just kind of characterize him as a tight end, even though that's his labeled position on the depth chart. But I think having Foster Moreau is great in situations like this where he has to fill in for Waller. But yeah, I mean, running two tight end sets out there when you can essentially have them both blocking or have them both running routes is, it's a lot defenses have to worry about. And I think we're starting to see them kind of open that up a little bit this year now that he's getting more snaps. But I'm just happy we have someone as good as he is to fill in for Waller, because that's obviously a huge hit to the offense with him not there.
Yeah, I mean, as a Bears fan, they, bringing in Jimmy Graham to be tight end to be, for what he once was and trying to develop Cole Kmet. I mean, that is a really important position now in the NFL, not just for blocking, but, also for the receiving part. I mean, it's a huge part of a lot of offenses and, very well, it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, over the years, Travis Kelsey, George Kittle have really opened that up and shown how important they can be. Having a big body guy that can kind of secure the middle of the field as opposed to trying to get smaller gadgety wide receivers over the middle. Having that threat that is big. You got to either put a bigger safety on him, or got to have a fast linebacker that can cover him, or it's just in mismatch all day long. So it definitely is something that is the pass catching tight end has been a very big um, thing as of lately. It's kind of emerged as a very important position. So I think the Bears were trying to really wrangle in as many as they could. I think they had like eight
Mhm.
tight ends go on the roster going into this season.
Yeah, it was yeah, yeah, not pretty, yeah, so and Jimmy Graham practices when he wants to and,
Yeah.
so, yeah. So hopefully, Cole Kmet can kinda continue to develop with Justin Fields, I think that's
Yeah.
important. My question for, did, Waller get invited to tight end you?
Yeah, I believe him and Moreau both
Oh.
went to tight end U. So I think the Raiders had the most tight ends representing tight ends at that tight end U. So um,
I was gonna ask if Moreau would get an invite. That's I'm from Iowa, so I am a huge Kittle fan and love Iowa is tight end you. So shout out to Iowa there. And but looking on the other side of the ball, you talked about some of the key defensive players. The defense. Obviously has been doing all right. Right.
yeah, they've been doing a lot better than Raiders fans are used to them doing in the
Mhm.
past few years, especially ever since we got rid of Mac. But, yeah,
Mhm.
they've been playing really well. They've played well enough to keep us in games, and, the biggest turnaround for whether we end up getting Ws or not is really whether the offense can get going. So the defense has been able to, make plays, keep us in games, up to a point where the offense, can't keep them off the field, then they end up burning out just like anyone does. But yeah, they've been great. We've really upgraded our pass rushing, bringing in Yannick Ngakoue. Max Crosby has been emerging as one of the best defensive ends in the game, definitely this year. So I think having the tandem of them has been key because Gus Bradley's defense, it's a cover three zone defense. It basically rushes with four, and drops the rest and tries to get home with four. It's a bend don't break. We'll give you the underneath stuff so we don't get beat deep kind of thing. And you've seen a lot of teams just kind of have long drives and chip away at us, but you know timely turnovers we've had, having those two guys that can get to the quarterback has been huge, and keeping us in games, and really giving the offense a chance to get us a lead and keep us out in front. So
And what about Casey Hayward then? In that, is he kind of been a solid and that defensive backfield? Talk about that group.
yeah, he's been great for us this year. He's been everything that the Raiders have hoped from a veteran player that they want to perform and be a top guy on the defense. I think over the years we've seen a lot of people get brought in to do that, and it's a lot of people that were good at one point, maybe past their prime, and they end up being a veteran but not being very good. He's been very good for us. He's been probably our number one corner all year. Has been very reliable. And it helps. He was with the Chargers when Gus Bradley was a defensive coordinator over there, so he's very familiar with the scheme. So I think he's been definitely one of the biggest acquisitions so far for us, because you have someone that can teach the young guys the scheme, can teach the young guys how to be a professional, but also go out there and ball out and be that number one guy for you. Because our defensive backs, very young group, a lot of talent in the group, very young though. So at some points they're sitting there, trial by fire, they're learning on the run. But if you can have someone, a veteran back there helping them along, I think we've seen that really help things out.
That's an interesting point that you say, a player that's familiar with the system. I mean, it's easy to kind of forget that, as a fan, that you want players that are going to fit into certain systems, and those different things can move around depending on the coaches, and all that can play a factor as well, and who signs with who and whatnot as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on the reverse side of that thing, I think you're really seeing um, Cleveland Farrell get phased out,
Mhm.
as someone that they want to rely on, because he's not really fitting with what Gus Bradley's trying to do. And he's been in there on a lot of early downs. He's great setting the edge, as a run edge defender. He's not a number four overall pick that was drafted to be a franchise guy and essentially be what Max Crosby has been for us. But that's kind of on the opposite end of things, is you can kind of see who gets phased out, kind of see who's not making as much of an impact, because it doesn't quite fit what they do. He's been a lot more effective on special teams as of lately than he has anything he's been doing on defense. So
And, I mean, could they possibly move on from him? I mean, obviously it depends, if Gus Bradley stays, I don't know if with the coaching change, if he would stay or not, or, I mean, could they kind of, cut ties with Cleveland Farrell at the end of the year?
possibly, yeah. I mean, he's another guy. He was in the Jacobs and Abram draft. He was the very first pick of that draft, so he's coming up soon. They're obviously not going to pick up his fifth year option. I think at this point, from what we've seen, his availability and what we've been able, where they've been putting him, I feel like they've kind of cut ties with him as it is already, as being that dude, as hoping that he's going to be some elite DN, someone who even really produces a lot on the defense. So do they keep him around? As a moral guy, someone who can, fill in, and get some snaps on defense, can be a special teams guy possibly, but you know, he's not going to be what we brought him in to be. So you could see them potentially not pick up any fifth year or sign him again. I don't think they just cut him. I don't think they just get rid of him. But it'd be hard. I'd be hard pressed to see them give him some type of extension outside of them seeing something that we don't see. So
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. I mean, um, drafting is not it's not a exact science. I mean, there's so many things that go into it, and going into the 2022 draft. I mean, do you see them kind of focusing on linebacker or like for the defense, or where would you, um, would they go back defensive line, or I mean, they've got having some of those solid players there. Are they set or?
I would like them to target some linebacker early on, if they can get kind of, this new generation hybrid linebacker, that is a sideline to sideline type of guy. You see, we covered a lot of draft stuff in the off season. I was very high on Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who got drafted by the Browns in the second round. But he was one of those guys that was sideline to sideline, could lay hat. Devin White was another one of those guys. You see him
Mhm,
doing great for the Bucks. So
mhm,
it's kind of a newer age hybrid linebacker that can blitz, fill a gap. You see Micah Parsons as a rookie really killing it for Dallas. So, and those are generational talents, obviously, but we're starting to see more and more of them pop up at linebacker. So I would like to see them kind of target someone like that because with this Gus Bradley defense, he was very made popular where when Seattle had the Legion of Boom defense, and I think one of the biggest things for them is that they had elite linebackers that could cover that middle, that could work sideline to sideline because Gus Bradley doesn't blitz a lot, so he's relying on his linebackers to cover that intermediate 5 to 10, 15 yard range, and that's where teams pick us apart a lot. And our linebackers are doing all right, but if you look at it, they are the weak spot in our defense. We get a lot of pass rush. We've been covering great on the back end. Linebacker is kind of where we've had some faults. So I would like them to address that. I think that there's some good defensive tackle talent in this draft that we could possibly target as well. I haven't looked into it too much. I just know that there's some good talent out there that would definitely be in the range at where we possibly will pick. It's hard to, to guess where people are going to pick and whatnot. But, you know, right now with where we're at, we're obviously trending on the back half of things. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. We kind of need help. I don't say we need dire help in a lot of different places, but there's positions like D tackle, linebacker, even, receiver at one point that having someone on the higher end elite talent, top end talent. That's what we need. We have a lot of middle of the road, good above average talent in those positions. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways we can go. It's one of those things that's hard to say right now when I haven't really dove into a lot of things and kind of seeing where everything pans out really on who's even entering the draft is a big one than that when that comes around. So, but
yeah.
it'll be an interesting offseason. Like I said, we're kind of in a weird predicament at the moment where it's like, let's try to make the playoffs. Let's focus on what we're doing right now. But
Well, yeah, talk about that a little bit. Where do you? I mean, do you realistically kind of with the schedule see them? Number one, making the playoffs, and number two, making a run. I mean, um, with Derek Carr, it almost seems to be a lot of different probabilities. Like, I mean, complete flame out too. I don't want to say Super Bowl. I don't know if that's
yeah.
the ceiling or not, or what are you seeing?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, the Raiders kind of have been living and dying by Carr.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna sit here and say that I think he, is Super Bowl winning talent, but I think that he can play well enough that, you know, anyone can win a Super Bowl. You got to get hot at the right time. We've seen people with average quarterbacks and good defenses win Super Bowl. It just I always tend to be on the optimistic side of things and look at the good and try to talk myself into things as a fan. Even though we can be realistic about it as well, but I think that the Raiders could very well, kind of go what would it be? 4-2 going out from here, put them around 10-6, and sneak into that one of the wild card spots. I mean, the division is up for grabs as it is. So
Mhm.
that's as much as it's like there's an extra wild card spot. Let's try to squeak into those. The AFC is very competitive at the top when it comes into that range of people that are fighting for their division and fighting for a playoff spot as well. So or a wild card spot. So I think it's very likely that we could, get one or the other if we can get some big wins against the Chiefs, against the Chargers. We play Washington this week and the Chiefs next week. So, if we were talking about it on our last podcast, if we win and the Chiefs win, you've got 8-4 and 7-5 facing off against each other. It's a really big
Mhm.
game for, you know, where we could be at. The Chargers play the Bengals. That's a very, likely game that they could possibly lose. So, it's one of those things where it's, each week is a very important week. So it's hard to say one way or the other, but I'm optimistic that, they can at least fight for a playoff spot. I tell myself that every year because we're, by week 12, we're in a very good spot, the last 2 years and just kind of imploded on ourselves. So I don't know.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting to see.
when you look at a year, I mean, the way the Chiefs have played this year, I mean, this is probably the most winnable of a division this year as maybe the Raiders have seen in the past. I mean, especially when you look at the Chiefs defense, they've been all over the place. But yeah, I mean, Chiefs, Broncos are beatable, Browns are, Colts are interesting. They're trending up now. But yeah, and the Chargers, it's really out in front of the Raiders when you look at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this year what's going on with the Chiefs is that their offense is finally not perfect. Their
Mhm,
offense, their defense has always been pretty bad,
mhm,
but Mahomes is throwing interceptions, and their offense hasn't been able to produce enough to make up for their defense. Their offense has always been able to just go down and score at will whenever they wanted to. So if they weren't out ahead of you already, they could go down and catch up. We saw the Super Bowl against the Niners is the perfect example about that. So
mhm.
I think they're finally struggling on offense. Their defense is also worse than it has been, even though they have always been bad. But yeah, I mean, at this point in the year, we're used to seeing the Chiefs with double digit wins already,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
only a couple losses. So it's definitely up for grabs. I think it's right for the pickings, and they need to. The Raiders are just as much control of their own destiny as any other team in this division. So, and I think that's not something we're used to seeing this late in the season.
Does the narrative about the season or maybe even the future going forward change if they don't make the playoffs? Like, I mean, they don't make the playoffs, they fall flat. I mean, do they just say, okay, we need to clean house, we need to do that rebuild, we need to get rid of Derek Carr? I mean, does the narrative change, between playoffs or no playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can very well be a big indicator of the way this franchise goes. I think as we're in our eighth season with Derek Carr, we've been in this position a lot, and you know, can he take that next step? And that's what we got to see is whether he could do that or not. And that's if he can continue to, because he's gotten better every single year since Gruden has been here, and he has done better every single year, and our team has essentially gotten better every single year. So I mean, they are trending, but how quickly can you, trend to where you need to be before it's like, do we pull the plug on this? So I think, I think if they make the playoffs, if they get it, at least get into the playoffs, maybe they win the first round that they're in and, do something. I think you look at it and you say, okay, who are we going to bring in as head coach? What are they going to be able to do? Maybe let's not blow up the ship right now. Um, if they lose the rest of their games, I think it's very easy to see like, all right, well, we got to take a long, hard look at, where we want to go from here and whether we want to, you know, start the rebuild now and hope to be back in a few years.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting season. You look at, I mean, they losing to the Bears, it just losing to the Giants, then they got blown out by the Chiefs, right? And just the up and down. I mean, Dallas is at a similar kind of up and down. Um, do you really, I mean, have a sense of what this team is yet? Or, I mean,
Yeah, I think we have a sense of who the Raiders are, and what they can do, and what you know they're capable of. I think the question mark is can they do it consistently, and we haven't necessarily seen them be consistent. The other side of things is can they do it towards the end of the season when people are tired, when people are banged up, that final stretch. They haven't been able to do that the last few years, like I've said. So, it's rough because it's like we know who they are, we know who they can be. We also know who they've been as Raiders fans. So that's why you have hope, but you try not to get yourself too excited because you've seen this story before. You've been brokenhearted before. It's it's an ex that's done this to you before, but you still have hope no matter what. So,
I'm guessing you see the Chiefs as kind of the biggest rival, right?
yeah, I would say so.
Because I mean, that it's almost seemed like the Chiefs, and I have friends that are Chiefs fans, and they were in a similar spot, always kind of just getting there, and it's so interesting how and obviously it's a huge Super Bowl win can kind of just change that narrative, because who knows if maybe the Chiefs were really just a flash in the pan. I mean, with their offense or whatnot, we don't know that yet, and so you get if Derek Carr takes that step, it would kind of give them the benefit of the doubt from fans and even national media as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really hard to look over within your division and see, the most electrifying quarterback in the NFL and,
Mhm.
look at it and say like, well, we don't really have it. We have a good chance at playing for number two every year because,
Mhm.
Patrick Mahomes is on the other side there. So yeah, I think, looking at it, I think that type of situation also is what gives fans some thought of like, just go draft somebody, like be done with Carr. Look at the draft because look what the Chiefs were able to do with Mahomes. And that's one of those things, like you said, it's not an exact science. You just
Mhm.
you hit when you hit. In that same exact draft, the Bears moved up for Trubisky, and we saw that happen. Not to
Yeah, still
open any
remind
old
me that.
wounds for you, sorry,
Yeah, no,
but
yeah.
but so many people overlooked Mahomes, and
Mhm.
whatever it was about the Chiefs, they went up and got him, and it worked out. So I think a lot of things can just be, it's got to kind of be the perfect storm that kind
Mhm.
of comes together at once. But yeah, I mean, I think if you know you don't see a whole lot of quarterbacks get this much time without making the playoffs, to run a team and be that guy. So I think that's a big reason why a lot of fans are fed up. But yeah, I think a lot of things change when you make the playoffs and you win games. It's a big "what have you done for me lately" type of league. So that's
Absolutely.
where it's got to start. So
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. And just want to, everyone can find you then at Raider Take Podcast. Where can everyone find you on Twitter and other places?
yeah, so on Twitter it's at Take Raider for the podcast account. I am at Micahson55. My co-host Andy is also my brother. You can find him at underscore Andy Mac 2 underscore. Instagram it's Raider Take Podcast. YouTube it's Raider Take Podcast. So you can find us on all of those. And yeah, really anywhere that you can find podcasts, we're there. So
Awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate your time. I've learned a ton, and definitely like to touch base, off season and all that, and just kind of check in. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
yeah, it's been awesome. I really appreciate that, and it was fun.
Once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Las Vegas Raiders, and we'll catch you next episode. Thanks again.
Appreciate it.